Hi. Hello. Thank you. Hi. My name's Deborah Jarvis, and I am the author of the Kirillithene Chronicles, and I also have another book from another series called Wolves Running, and that's from the Shapeshifter Symposium. But tonight, I'm going to do a reading from the first book, The Crystal Pawn. This particular story follows Deirdre Hawes as she enters another world, as discovered her father is from this world, and he is asking for her to help them call the dragons. And it's something that runs only in the female line, and she's the last descendant who has the ability to possibly call them. But what ends up happening is she's very much herded from place to place and very much guarded, and it comes very apparent that unless she breaks free and finds a way to find the dragons on her own, she's not going to be able to actually succeed. So by this point in the story, we're going to be reading close to the end, about somewhere in the last third of the book. She has gotten free of her minders, and she has some people who are traveling with her, and they have gone to locate the one person that they know has met with and found and spoken with a dragon in the last 300 years or so, and his name is Jack Parnes. He's kind of a disgraced courtier, kind of Sir Francis Drake to the Queen Brenna, where he's kind of a rogue and kind of does things under the table and under the radar, and he's fallen out of favor, so his name isn't even mentionable in the court anymore. So she has gone with a few other people to go and locate him and get his help, and he has just agreed to help her and to go and get the items that they're going to need for the rest of their trip to the south, and is going to be escorting her into the marketplace to have her help him make sure they have the right equipment. So this is where we're going to be going into the book at this point in time, where she is waiting for Jack Parnes to come back and escort her where she needs to go. Deirdre drank the last of her wine to cover her embarrassment. She's just been called out on liking another character. As Jack re-entered the room, followed by Rontil, who's his companion. The larger man handed her a red dress made out of satin, and Deirdre shook it out, staring at it critically. "You've got to be kidding," she said. "My dear, in that dress and a little makeup, no one will recognize you," grinned Jack. "I will wait outside while you change. Jasper, if you would please go with Rontil, he could use your help." Jasper stood and took Deirdre's hand, bowing over it. "Take care," he said. "I will see you at the meeting place." Nodding, Deirdre watched them all leave the room and changed into the red dress. The cut was tight, and the bodice was very low and revealing, not covering nearly enough. She stubbornly left her trousers on under the dress, trying to save some face, and bundled the rest into a small pile. When she opened the door, Jack stepped in, grinning, and held aloft a tray of various creams and powders. "I have had to do this on several occasions before. If you will allow me," he said, and spent the next 20 minutes applying various things to her face. When he was done, he held up a mirror, and she looked at herself in horror. She looked like a harlot, Deirdre thought, with enough makeup to paint a small ship. She turned to Jack and for a moment felt like hitting him. I know, he grinned impishly. "But believe me, I have walked through the center of market several times with women on the run and dressed like this. They've never gotten any more attention than for what they appear to be." "Small wonder," said Deirdre dryly. "We'll get all that stuff off again when we get back here later," he said. "I really need you to go with me, though. I need numbers, sizes, and information." He produced a filmy red scarf that he wrapped loosely around her hair like a snood, effectively hiding her horns, and then moved to leave the room. Seeing that she had not followed him, he said, "Don't worry about your sweetheart. Rontil will return your lover safe and sound to you when we rendezvous with them later." "He's not my lover," snapped Deirdre, glaring at Jack's amused and slightly arrogant expressions. "Don't return him to me. Just return him is all I ask." "My lady," bowed Jack with a hint of sarcasm to his voice, and led the way down the hall. At the door, Jack took a bright red cloak from among those hanging there and handed it to her. Deirdre rolled her eyes but put it on, and Jack led the way outside. Deirdre followed him down the end of the street and then turned left back towards the Inn of the Fire Horse. She was grateful that there were very few people on the street to see her in the disguise she was wearing, and she felt like slinking through the ground the closer towards Market they got. "Put your arm in mine. There," said Jack, catching her arm and placing it over his own. "Try to put a little swing in your hips. If you don't act the part, no one will believe you." "That was rather the point," muttered Deirdre under her breath. "We're going to need some desert clothing," said Jack, ignoring her. "How many are there going to be in your party?" "2 humans, 1 minotaur, and a wolf, besides you and your friend," said Deirdre dryly. "There are others, but they won't be coming with us." "The wolf wouldn't happen to be Lady Nurse, would it?" asked Jack. "I haven't seen her in ages. She must be fairly old now." "She has more gray hairs than Carter has little liver pills," said Deirdre, smiling as they came near enough to Market to begin to hear the din of the ware sellers. "But she still has plenty of spring in her step." Jack stopped and looked at her with wide eyes. "What the— You?" he said in shock, and then laughed. "What gave me away?" "It was the dime a dozen comment," said Deirdre. "That and you use contractions. Then again, I did refer to our friend as your old drinking buddy. You should have caught that. Fess up. How long have you been here?" "About 10 years," said Jack, resuming their walk and leaning towards her, lover-like. "You?" "About 6 weeks, actually," said Deirdre, "just long enough to turn an entire country on its collective ear." "I guess," said Jack, chuckling. "You've got me beat by about 3 weeks. Now is not the time to discuss this, however. We'll talk later. Follow my lead, and don't forget to swing a little. Loosen up. Have some fun. None of these people will ever see you again anyway, and even if they did, they wouldn't recognize you. Anyway, no one is looking at your face." He paused and grinned at her as she turned beet red. She found him much more likable when he genuinely smiled, but no less aggravating. "Now I have to come along. Your story sounds at least half as interesting as mine, and the natives here have no idea how naive you must actually be." "Ha!" said Deirdre indignantly. "I've been doing just fine, thank you." Jack laughed, and they entered the crowd at Market. The next half hour was a flurry of activity and shopping that would have put an experienced mall troller to shame. Jack seemed to know all the innkeepers intimately, each one addressing him as Malcor the trader, and referring to him and deferring to him as he shopped, with seemingly endless care and bottomless purse. Deirdre watched as he noted each of the purchases in a small bound book. He glanced at her once and told her snidely that he was adding it to Brenna's tab. After the first shop, he told her that she needed to be a bit more demanding and to try to get him to buy things for her. Deirdre fell into the role, and Jack acted with exaggerated expiration, it rolling his eyes at the merchants and indulgently buying her the occasional sweet or trinket. It became a game to them, and Deirdre actually began to have fun and forget how dangerous it was for her to be in the city. Jack's eyes glittered with amusement, and he sighed and coddled her appropriately. The real purchases, however, were made with exact calculations, were all sent along by messengers to a small house near the gate, through which they would leave. Tan cloaks, sandals, snowshoe-like contraptions, dried rations of meat and fruit, broad-brimmed hats, and innumerable other items were sent off with a scurrying stream of servants, all tipped generously to deliver and forget. They even managed to find a wolf-sized pair of dog boots tucked away in the back of the leathersmith's shop to protect Nurse's paws from the hot sands. They also found a large pair of fur-lined boots that Deirdre guessed would fit Tor, and these were also sent off to the storehouse, all without so much as an odd glance from the merchants, most of whom seemed more interested in Deirdre than in Jack's purchases. "While you are a great distraction, I often deal in some strange items," said Jack, "although," he added, eyes twinkling and glancing down with a grin, "the low cut of that dress doesn't hurt either." Deirdre blushed again and barely restrained herself from smacking him. The last of the parcels were delivered, and a note was sent off to Rontil and Jasper to let them know to head out as soon as possible. Jack still had one last place he wanted to stop before they left the square. There's a little sweet shop over by the blacksmith's corner that makes candied rose and violet petals. I want to get some for the road. They are well worth the inflated price that the confectioner sells them for, and I'm not going to see any for a long while where we are going," he said. "Might as well get some before we go. Please indulge me a few moments longer, lady." They started across the square, weaving their way between the mass of servants, housewives, and peddlers, when suddenly they noticed people parting on either side of the central road, and several market-goers gasped at what they had seen. Jack craned his neck around to see what the fuss was all about, and then ducked down into the crowd again. Deirdre saw a man on horseback riding through the center of the square, and she looked over at Jack, who was glancing around himself for a clear way out of market. "I thought they didn't allow riders in market," said Deirdre. "They don't," said Jack, ducking slightly and pulling her along with him as casually as he could. "That is no ordinary rider. That's your friend Jasper's father." Deirdre looked back at the black-cloaked figure sitting astride the midnight steed as he rode around the side of the market. It could only be moments before they came fully into his view, and for whatever reason, Deirdre somehow knew that her disguise would not fool him. "Quickly," hissed Jack in a tense voice. "Duck down and follow me." He grabbed her hand and led her at a squirreling run through the throng of people in the square, dodging and weaving as best he could while trying to stay unseen. Twice they bumped into someone, and around one of these yelled so loudly that every head in market turned to see their direction. A scream of rage from the stallion penetrated the air. Jack glanced back and then stood up, running now at full tilt and dragging Deirdre with him through the crowd. Deirdre also managed to spare a glance back, and the sight that greeted her eyes imprinted itself on her memory. Against the backdrop of the wooden buildings that framed the rapidly clearing market reared the stallion, the rider sitting strong on its back, looking directly at them as they ran. The horse's head was thrown back, clipped black mane waving like a dull, dark shroud. Its reddened eyes stared wildly out of its gaunt, skull-like face, and its bared teeth gleamed horribly white, and its hooves were feathers the colors of blue flame that rippled and flickered as it pawed the air. "Don't look back!" cried Jack. "Run! That's no ordinary horse!" Deirdre grimly ran and dodged through the crowds, throwing herself one way, then skipping nimbly the other, half tripping, half racing through the crowds. She could hear the hooves of the rider's horse clattering like tumbled coconut hulls over the muddied cobblestones behind them, and knew that he would catch them if they weren't quicker. People parted before the rider, not wanting to get in the way of the demonic steed and the furious being who rode him. Jack pulled her down one of the streets that led out of market, away from the crowds, and the way became easier for them to move. They released each other's hands and ran straight out as fast as they were able, taking rights and lefts with reckless abandon. Deirdre had hiked her skirts as high as she could in order to sprint, glad that she had kept her trousers on underneath. She had kicked off her shoes, no longer caring what she bolted through in her bare feet so long as she could run. The hoofbeats followed them, and they mistakenly turned into a dead-end alley blocked by a wall that seemed to Deirdre very high. "Come on, climb!" shouted Jack. "It's only about 12 feet." "I can't climb that!" Deirdre exclaimed. "I've never climbed a wall in my life." "Try!" Deirdre hunted for handholds on the rough brick, but none seemed to give her enough purchase to hold on to. The hoofbeats slowed but grew louder. Resolutely they turned to fight, Deirdre realizing that she had left her sword back at Jack's house as Jack handed her one of his daggers. A noise behind them made them turn back. From above on the wall fell a knotted rope, and a man's face peered down from the top of the barricade. "Up here!" he called. "Hurry!" Jack resheathed the weapon, and Deirdre grabbed the rope, climbing it as fast as her skirts would allow. The man reached a hand down to pull her up, and as soon as she was safely on the top of the wall, Jack swarmed up the rope like a monkey. Within seconds, they had pulled up the rope and lowered it back down the other side. Deirdre went first, followed by Jack. Their benefactor dropped the end of the rope he had been holding and jumped down, landing as lightly as a cat. No sooner had he done this than from the other side of the wall came a scream of fury. "He had best get out of here," said the stranger. "Who are you?" asked Deirdre, looking at him fully for the first time. He had chiseled features, bright blue eyes, dark hair, and an odd birthmark in the center of his forehead that almost looked like a spiraling star. The man smiled slightly, small crow's feet wrinkling the corners of his eyes. Deirdre gazed at him as comprehension dawned on her. Yes, he said, you know who I am. Now hurry before he finds his way around the wall. But, Deirdre said, confused. Go, said their benefactor urgently. I will talk to thee later. Deirdre nodded, and together she and Jack fled. We have to get out of here fast, said Jack. We can't stop back at the house, so I'm sorry about your clothes. Rontil has the rest of our gear, and we'll just have to meet him at the rendezvous sooner than we planned. Can't we at least stop to wash my face off? Panted Deirdre. No time now, said Jack. Once we are out of the city, I'll find you a nice stream or pond or something. Move. They continued on running swiftly through the streets, and Deirdre finally had to stop to catch her breath. Jack glanced around them nervously, as the gate was still a long way off. Finally, it dawned on Deirdre there was a better solution. Look, she said, how much further is it? About a mile to the gate, and then a couple of miles further to the place we will meet Rontil. Okay, said Deirdre, you're going to have to ride then. We can go faster that way. We don't have horses, said Jack. Rontil has them. Yes, but you have me, said Deirdre, and shifted her form into that of the Pinto mare. The transformation happened swiftly, and in seconds she was on all fours. The cobbles felt slick under her hooves, and she scraped one foot across them to get the feel for the footing. Aha! Exclaimed Jack, stepping back and stumbling before catching his balance. He stood there, one hand over his chest, while he composed himself. Warn a guy, won't you? He said. She tossed her head and motioned him with her muzzle. He nodded and warily pulled himself up onto her back, grabbing handfuls of her party-colored mane, and lightly kicked her in the sides. She jumped forward, then it was her turn to glare at him. He shrugged apologetically, and they moved out. There was some traffic on the streets when they passed, and the conditions on the road steadily declined until they were riding through refuse from both humans and animals. There was a strong smell of fish in the air, and Deirdre realized why the fish market was kept far away from the regular market crowds. The smell was hideous. Jack guided her verbally through the streets, stopping once for a rundown stable to procure a dilapidated saddle and ancient bridle. Deirdre initially balked when he came near her with the tack, raising her head as high as she could to avoid the bridle. Look, he hissed, I know this is not your thing, but I can't just ride you through the gate bareback. I promise to take them right off again as soon as we're out of sight. Deirdre reluctantly allowed him to place the saddle on her and let him put the bit in her mouth, only after he had washed it in a rain barrel and wiped it clean with the corner of his cloak. It tasted as bad as Vexanius had described, and she stood unhappily as he tightened the straps and fastened the buckles of the bridle. He climbed into the saddle and gingerly took up the reins. I won't pull on them, he said when she laid her ears back, but I have to at least hold them. She stomped a hoof in protest, but when he urged her that they had to hurry, she moved out at a jarring trot. He hung on grimly, and a short time later they finally reached the small gate in the wall that seemed to be mainly trafficked by fish sellers and dung dealers. There had thankfully been no further sign of Lord Ganley and his terrifying horse by the time they reached the portal, and the guards raved them through with bored expressions. Deirdre broke into a canter once they were out of sight of the walls, and they made good their escape from the dangers of Malapur. Once well outside the city, Deirdre finally slowed down, first to a trot, then to a walk, cooling herself out. Jack slid down from her back, keeping one hand on her shoulder to steady himself, and Deirdre could feel him trembling. She wasn't sure if it was from their flight or from her transformation, but she tried to walk smoothly and be as supportive as she could, staying in her horse shape long after she had cooled off. They continued on in silence until they reached a cool, clear stream, and Jack removed the tack so Deirdre could change back. With Jack's help, she washed all traces of makeup from her face, and refreshed, they picked up the old saddle and bridle and continued on until they saw Jasper and Rontal waiting at the rendezvous point. The men were sitting astride horses and holding the reins of the 3 pack mules loaded with the supplies for the journey. The rest of the group is down in the valley about 3 miles waiting for us, said Jasper. You two look done in. Trouble? asked Rontil, looking at Jack with a raised eyebrow. We had a bit of a run-in with Master Jasper's father this afternoon, Jack said lightly, swinging up into the saddle behind Rontil. He gave us some exercise. My father? Asked Jasper as he turned his horse towards Deirdre and paused, momentarily struck by her attire. Ogle her later, Lord Jasper. We must go, said Jack sweetly. Yes, your father. He definitely wasn't there to invite us to a picnic. He chased us across felt like half the city, I should think. He would have had us in a dead-end alley if not for a man with a strange mark on his forehead who threw us a rope. Deirdre seemed to know him. I know of him, I think, said Deirdre, struggling up behind Jasper, the heavy ruffled skirt of the dress and cloak making it almost impossible, even with Jasper's help. She was again glad for her trousers, for the dress was not very warm, and she managed to tuck her feet under the edges of her cloak. I've never met him officially. This is definitely something we should discuss with the others, though. They left the trail and trotted off into the woods, leaving behind very little trace of their passing. Deirdre wearily noted that the sky was slowly becoming even more overcast, promising snow in the near future. Mrae Satal said that there is a cave often used by his people not far from here at the foot of the southern mountains, said Jasper. They headed there to wait for us, but Nurse said that she would remain behind to guide us in because she is the least conspicuous. We should be there before nightfall. Jack looked up at the rapidly clouding sky and shivered. It can't be too soon, I think, he said. We've got some weather coming in. I plan on sleeping for a week, yawned Deirdre. I'm not used to all of this. Jack laughed and said, Neither are we, lady. Rontil and I have grown soft with all our easy living. Right, old friend? Rontil merely grunted and concentrated on steering his massive horse around rocks and fallen logs. The rhythm of the horse's gait was lulling, and Deirdre's eyelids became heavy in spite of her efforts to stay awake. Finally surrendering, she wrapped her arms firmly around Jasper's waist, closing her eyes, and rested her head on Jasper's back, falling into an exhausted doze. Jack glanced over at her and smiled. That right there tells me more about you than anything you could have said or done, he said softly to Jasper. She obviously trusts you. I've worked hard to win that trust, said Jasper. But not hard enough? Asked Jack teasingly. Her heart is not tied to mine, no, said Jasper. It was already given to another, I think. Ah, nodded Jack sagely. Competition. Jasper laughed quietly and shook his head. There is no competition, friend. Neither I nor you could compete with bonds formed by magic, he said. Your old drinking buddy beat us both. Jack groaned mockingly. Trust him to get the girl again, he said with exaggerated sorrow. Even still, he still wins. Jasper snorted his amusement, and then they rode on in silence under the leaden sky until a patch of white detached itself from the undergrowth and resolved into the form of Lady Nurse. The first fat flakes of snow had begun to fall from the sky, and the wind was stirring in the treetops. Tolly must be watching out for us, said Nurse as she trotted up to them. It's good to see you again, Jack. Hurry now. Let's get inside before the snow really falls. Come on. It's only a half a mile more. She looked at Deirdre asleep in the scarlet dress and Jasper's care, and felt her heart move at the sight of the brave woman so sound asleep that the moisture of the snowflakes melting on her upturned cheek wasn't waking her. Come on, then, she said gruffly, and led the way back through the falling dark. And that's all for the reading that I had planned today, but I hope that this has given you some idea of what the book is like, and some of the other points that will be cleared up in the second book, which is also out, which is The Ivory Queen. So certainly you can find these books on any of the major booksellers. They're easily found under my name, Deborah Jarvis. So I wanted to thank everybody for attending and taking a listen today, and thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Awesome.